So Dan, I'm going to do my best.
Great.
You know, I am not the engineer who did all of his recordings at 30th Street, but I did a substantial amount, and it was always a different challenge. It's always a different challenge. Well, first of all, you didn't approach 30th Street with rock and roll.
Right.
You knew it was loud. You knew it was reverberant. You knew you were going to have some leakage problem, depending what you're looking for. However, whenever we got a chance to do that, or we had the opportunity because we were forced to do it, because other rooms weren't available, you were a little surprised. There was something about the high ceiling that just took the sound away from other microphones in a very natural manner, and that always surprised me. I never really avoided the studio. We didn't require it. However, we did strings and horns. Most of the sessions were done. I did a bunch of recordings. I think Billy Joel's Strangers, the strings and horns were done at 30th Street, and Jimmy Iovine, who's now the head of Apple Music, was an assistant engineer when I started out, and Jimmy worked his way into production through engineering, through doing Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
So once he did Springsteen, I mean, he really got a reputation and started building his career. So Jimmy and Shelley Yakis would come in, do all of their string and horn arrangements on a lot of their records with me, and I used 30th Street for that. That was a natural. You could make a little closer. Sometimes you had to. The room is what it is, but nevertheless, you know, in order to get any kind of presence on things, you have a rock and roll group, a rock and roll record, which is tightly mic'd, and then you put distant mic strings. Sometimes it doesn't really fit, so you really had to match things, and we were able to do that at 30th Street. I thought we got a very good sound. So the recordings that we did there, I mean, they were always very happy. They were always pleased with.
What year did you start with CBS?
I started at CBS in '65. I was a classically trained musician, so they thought the logical thing is for me to edit classical music. So I spent quite a bit of time editing classical music. You know, I got real good at splicing because we were doing Schoenberg and Stravinsky, and they would Robert Kraft would do those from in Los Angeles with professional musicians. He didn't necessarily use orchestras. He would get a group of professional musicians, rehearse like 2-4 bars at a time, and splice them together. So all of those pieces were done very, very, you know. So I got a great experience from doing that.
Yeah.
But when the classical producers came in, as an editor, as a mixer, I wasn't doing anything significant. They would tell you where to lower, at the splice, lower the left channel 2 dB. It wasn't a lot of creativity. And then a young producer, Brad Baker, came in and started getting me involved with R&B and jazz and rock, and that's how I kind of got into doing the type of music I wound up doing. I did a lot of classical music.
As the engineer?
As the engineer, I did a couple of Broadway shows. I did, one was called Runaways. I think I mixed Sugar Sugar. I did a lot of things in 30th Street in the small studio, which was overdubbing and editing. But the 30th Street studio, again, I didn't get into the studio. I was a mixer, I was an editor. We had lots of us up on the 4th floor. I didn't get into the studios till Roy Halley left. And my boss came to me and said, I had mixed a lot of the projects that Roy had recorded. So he thought it was natural that I was, the clients knew me, and he thought it was natural that I should go into the studio, even though he told me 2 years later, if I had any hopes of getting into the studio, forget it. There are a lot of people ahead of me. Yeah, he warned me, and to me it didn't matter that much. So I started working in the studios then. It's probably around 68. First record I made was one of the early records was Dance to the Music. Sly Stone's Dance to the Music had a lot of success. So, it went on from there, and I got to do a lot of artists. But getting back to 30th Street, it's probably a couple of years. I'm going to guess I did the ballad that Chicago did with the flute solo "Color My World." That was done at 30th Street. Not much all of that I believe was done there. Not much of Chicago was not much of the rock stuff really. I did a Cecil Taylor album, which was a pretty hardcore jazz album for that. I did a jazz album called Alive Mother for Ya with some great musicians, including Billy Combe and Tom Scott, Alphonso Johnson.
You must have got an awesome drum sound on Cobham in that space.
That's true. Is it controllable?
Right.
It's okay.
Right.
It's okay. It was they really
big.
they did it sort of live.
Yeah.
So and then we did a lot of DIR broadcasts. They did I think the company was called DIR. They did a like a live show about once every couple of months. I'm trying to think of
In the studio?
In that studio in 30th Street. Yeah. And I did mention that to you. I can't remember some of the artists. A lot of rock groups. I think I may have documented some of that. I'll have to dig that up, but they were done there. And
so an audience would set up.
Yeah, they'd have an audience, the whole thing. Yeah.
There's a million pictures of the folding chairs.
And a direct broadcast. I mean, live to broadcast. That was done. What else did we do at 30th Street? Yeah, radio.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Network or local station? Remember?
I think it was network, but I could find out more about that.
Okay. So when you got there in '65 for the very first time, did you go in the control room that time, or were you?
No, that's when I was warned. If you have any hopes of being in the studio, because I was mixing and editing, mainly editing at that point. It was a while before I could mix. If you have any hope, forget it, because there are so many people ahead of you. But as I mentioned to you, the only fact that I had a relationship with 2 years later with those clients, because I had mixed for most of them. When Roy left, I took over in the studio. It was very difficult because Roy was leaving in 2 weeks, and I had to learn, how to work the studio in 2 weeks. And Freddie Cotero had been my mentor. Freddie was fantastic, very sharing. Freddie was fantastic. And he was great, but when I got to the last 2 weeks, I was sitting with Roy Halley trying to see what he did. He had very little time to explain anything, so I just kind of watched him, finish those projects. Everyone wanted to finish the project before Roy left, of course. And that was my training, and then I was, bang, you're in the studio.
From the pictures I've seen of him working, it looks like he's working very fast.
Roy? Oh yeah, Roy's mind was always moving. I mean, Roy would. Well, first of all, he was working with artists who took their time to do this stuff. So I think it's a combination of the artist being open and Roy being creative that led to all this experiment.
Trying new things.
I mean, you would think you would looking on a Roy Halley session, he'd have 8 2-track machines out in the studio while he was mixing in the control room, doing all kinds of reverb and stuff. I mean, that's who Roy was. He was constantly, running 2 machines through the same capstan to keep them in sync. So he was doing 16-track with 8-track machines, and this is what he did. I was always more interested in really trying to capture the sound that the group was getting. Maybe not as creative as Roy, or maybe just into a different bag.
People are different. Projects are different. You mentioned the reverb there. Do you know anything about the reverb chamber or what they were doing for reverb?
At 30th Street. Oh, we had live room. We had these big rooms.
Did you ever go into?
We're not allowed. Well, I went into them, but we're not allowed to touch a microphone or a speaker. It was like, no, these are set. These are set, guys. We don't mess with this.
So when you went into it, where was it? Where was the room? Or the rooms? Was there more than one room? Downstairs in the basement.
Yeah.
Not on the main floor.
No.
Not on the upstairs.
No.
You didn't go upstairs.
No, everything was downstairs.
Downstairs.
Yeah.
So
There was no upstairs really, except where the old control room used to be, and I never saw that.
Oh, there was an upstairs, and if we found a aerial view from 1926 or so, because the building was built in 1875. It was a church until 1943-ish.
Yep.
And so the structure was pretty much the same, the exterior, until it was torn down. And the studio shape was kind of rectangular with some angled portions in the corner and then parallel ends. I'm not sure what shape that is, but parallel, narrowed, like that, kind of. And there was an equally sized thing on the street side of the studio. And when you see a picture from the street, you see the sidewalk in front of the building. There's doors on either end. There's some kind of travertine or something going up a story. And then there's 2 stories of windows above that.
Okay.
And there were rooms up there. And somebody else maintains that the reverb chambers were up on the 2nd floor and not down in the basement. And Frank was absolutely certain that the reverb chambers were down in the basement, and he talked about when he and somebody else figured out that there could be a reverb chamber in this room if we just cleared it out.
Frank did that?
Yeah, that's what he says.
I didn't know that.
That's what he said, and I've read other reports where I think Harold Chapman or there's one other fellow whose name I'm spacing out also said that they did it. So who knows what happened, but at some point there was a storage room and maybe rooms that got turned into reverb chambers.
The only thing I knew was two rooms downstairs.
Okay.
I think there were only 2. Have you heard anything more than that?
I've never heard more than one. So this is.
I'm pretty sure there were 2 rooms down there.
Great.
Oh, I'm sure.
Great. How did you get down to them? Where was the stairway? Do you remember that?
No. That is so vague in my mind. Well, first of all, I left.
Right.
I left there in 1983. I left CBS in 1983.
Right.
And again, I didn't do that many. So another recording I did there that I really enjoy is I Am the Blues with Laura Nyro.
Oh, cool.
Laura Nyro, we had Randy Brecker playing a fantastic flugel solo. And he played the solo, and afterwards he said, "Guys, I got a Broadway show to go to. Listen, I'll come in Monday. You don't have to pay me. I just want to do that. I want to do it right. I want to do it again." And he came in Monday. We spent about 3 hours, and we kept listening to the original, and it was just so great. I said, "Randy, you really, you did it the first day." And he just,
It's funny how that works.
Yeah.
You think it's not as good as it is, and then you hear it, and it's like, wow, that's the one.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, it happens. Yeah, that happens.
How many times did you work with Laura Nyro?
Oh, I did about 3 albums with Laura, yeah. One at her house.
Huh.
So I did Smile, Season of Lights, maybe just 2.
Okay.
But I remember mixing one at her house, and she wanted to do piano overdubs. And she was not happy with the pianos at CBS. So we went to her house, and we spent about a month up there mixing and doing a couple of overdubs. And her piano was like baby grand, sort of out of tune,
But she loved it.
She loved it. She loved the sound, and that's who she was. Wonderful woman.
Yeah.
But that was with Charlie Colello. Charlie produced that session. did the charts. But I Am a Blue, the blues, it just builds in such a great way. It is an arrangement. It is an arrangement that helps.
Did she do the arranging? Or did
No,
somebody else?
Charlie.
Yeah,
Charlie did it all. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Charlie was really very good at that. I don't remember what else we did of Laura's. I remember doing some vocal overdubs, but nothing that would really make use of the studio.
Okay. When you do the overdubs, it sounds like you're in the small room, Studio D, not in
No. We would. When we use Studio D is when things were tight everywhere else, really.
Was there a mixer in there and a recorder, or you could get to the recorders?
Oh no, it was a full. That was a full little room. Yeah, we had a console and.
Do you know how
yeah.
many inputs it had?
No.
Okay. Was it round fader?
I would
rotary
say.
faders or sliders?
Well, we got rid of the round faders shortly after I got there, so everything went to
the sliders.
The slider,
The
yeah.
CBS made consoles with the sliders.
Right, and
I
then
have
we
some pictures
and
of
then we
those
went to
we can look at later.
MCI's.
Oh,
later.
MCI.
Before we went to to Neve, we had.
In 30th Street?
I think so.
Wow.
Can't be sure.
There must have been a fast
Because I
progression
think we
of
tried to
changes.
get consistent throughout. Tim Geelan might have a better recollection. You know who I wish was here because he documented things so wildly is Stan Tonkel.
Oh, yeah.
Stan was a master.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't believe how thorough he was. He
Really?
he would come in and say. Once I got to, the first time I got to record Miles Davis, it was like, why am I doing Miles Davis? You know, these guys have been working together for 20 years, you know. Would they have a divorce? You know, but it wasn't that. Stan had a session booked with Glenn Gould, and Miles decided to go another day. So Stan walks in. Now, the things are set up for that particular session because he's been recording for 3 days. So Stan walks in. Don, I thought maybe I'd show you what I have on the session. And he lays out this pad that had every placement of the microphones, you know, with all of the EQ, everything that he was doing, where things were positioned. He was very thorough.
Cool.
Wonderful man also, by the way. I don't know I know he has family, and I don't know what's become of all the archiving that Stan did. And Stan and I did the Isle of Wight together, which is another story. That has nothing to do with 30th Street.
I've seen pictures of him and Tio, I think, maybe that was the Isle of Wight.
Tio with Miles.
Yeah.
I have one with Miles, Tio, Stan, I think, producer, the producer of the show, the guy who does Newport Jazz. George Wein, thank you.
He did Isle of Wight, too?
He did Isle of Wight. Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's another tape.
Yeah.
But getting back to, I also did some overdubs with Glenn Gould at 30th Street. And Glenn, that was an interesting story, too, because the famous squeaky chair. It was like his father's chair or something.
His father made it for him.
He had to play on that chair, and,
Even when there was no seat on it, he was sitting on that damn chair.
And the first time I met him, by the way, it was an editing session uptown, and he walks in with Andy Kasdan, and Andy introduced us, and he said, he hands me his hand, but says, "Carefully, please." So I shook it very gently, or gently, something like that. Oh my God. Well, had to be 69, no later than 70.
Okay.
No, during the editing session, that had to be 68, maybe.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, because I was there from 65 to 67, mainly doing editing. So it could have even been a little bit earlier.
Okay, so he held out his hand?
He held out his hand and said, "Be careful," or gently, something like that. And I shook his hand. And afterwards, Andy Kasdan said to me, "I was real surprised to see him shake hands. He knew you were a musician. I think that's the only reason he shook hands with you, because he's very careful about, and he always had, he'd be sitting always with an overcoat on. He was very
And gloves, right?
very concerned about not necessarily gloves, because he would bump himself. Like once in a while, he would just somehow bruise himself, like getting up or something, and he'd say, "Oh," and he'd reach in his overcoat and he'd take out iodine or mercurochrome, I think it was, and he'd dab it, and it was amazing. It was amazing. And I saw a session yesterday where Tom Shepard and those guys, Steve Epstein, and they were talking about recording music and how, their name is not necessarily on the front of the album, that it's the artist, it's the composer, and Tom felt that he really, not to have conflict with the artist, but he really had to try to portray or capture what the composer was put into it. And I was thinking about Glenn Gould, and I even mentioned to Tom later, I'm not sure that works with Glenn. I mean, Glenn really had his concept of what the composer wanted, or what the proper interpretation was for Glenn Gould. I'm not sure which. I never really...
Well, his argument with Leonard Bernstein on was it a Beethoven session, and then a performance, I think at Town Hall, where Bernstein announced to the audience that the way the artist is playing this tonight is not the way that I would recommend. But, or paraphrasing here, but he chose to do it, and it's a valid interpretation, and I hope you feel however you feel about it, or something like that. And it's wow. And that was famous.
Did he get a reaction from Glenn on that, or?
Not that I heard. He got a reaction from the newspapers, that's for sure, from the critics of how unprecedented this was, that the conductor kind of steps over the artist a little bit. Yeah.
That's really different.
Yeah, but Glenn Gould was different.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would have ever felt comfortable doing that, but Bernstein is Bernstein, after all. By the way, the Bernstein Mass, we did some recording pre-Mass, because it had to be played. It was like quad recordings, which had to be played during the performance.
Oh.
So they were pre-recorded, but I'm pretty sure we did all of that in Studio B uptown. Okay. I don't remember being in 30th Street with Bernstein on the Mass.
There's plenty of shots of him in 30th Street. There's plenty of shots of him somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It was fun. It was fun.
I bet.
We wound up doing a lot of editing on 2-inch tape. We did it multi-track because the complexity of the elements, with a rock group and a jazz band, and the street chorus and choir and the orchestra.
Right.
So we try to do it live. We try to do it all, not really live, but
so you were able to get in
time.
with using 2-inch instead of doing the multiple 8 tracks like Roy was doing.
Oh no, I would never do that. That was a lot of effort. But no, we did it. I convinced McClure to not only do it on 24 tracks, but to have a second machine available. See, John and I had worked on a couple of rock groups together. New York Rock Ensemble was one of them, and John McClure was Bernstein's producer, and the head of Masterworks. So because we had done that, he knew I could handle the multi-track recording, and that's how I happened to wind up doing the Mass. So it was deliberate that we'd have a lot of mics and multi-track because of the various elements happening at the same time. But Lenny was told that he couldn't edit because it's 2-inch tape. And that worked until he got into the editing room. Couldn't you just try taking those 4 bars? Sure, I could try that, and of course it works. It's just a lot of work. My arms, on and off with 2-inch tapes, my arms were like
it's unbelievable how heavy those things are.
Yeah,
the full reel.
When you're doing that kind of work.
Yeah.
We might do a little editing, but my God, you're editing like a 2-track. That's different.
Now, when you started, was it 2-track? When you started as an editor, it was 2-track or 3-track?
No, as a matter of fact, they had just gotten the 8-track machine.
Oh, wow.
So in fact, some of the guys were wondering.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, some of the guys were wondering, like, 8 tracks.
Yeah,
I mean,
what do we do with all of those?
How are we gonna think of 8 things at one time? And I said, well, I'm a musician. I've got 10 fingers. I've been doing this all my life. I don't think this is an issue. Of course, we went way, way beyond that. And today there is no limit.
There really isn't. Yeah. It's amazing. So when you started there, the floor had been refinished. It was a smooth.
Now that's something I have to ask you about. I did a session in 30th Street that I remember extremely well. In fact, I remember going down to 30th Street whenever I had to go down to 30th Street wearing older clothes.
Oh, that's right.
I always wore older clothes because those cables, everything was very dusty from those floors. So were they refinished? I don't know about that.
My understanding, and the pictures seem to prove it, is that it was a finished floor at some point in the 40s, and the finish wore away, and between March of 56 and when they went to the new control room in about 63, 62, 64, control room on the side, they redid the floors then and polished them, and Frank said that he did the first session with the new situation, the new floors, and it sounded completely different. He didn't recognize the sound of the studio.
So they sand them down?
They sanded and coated them and polished them. It was my understanding.
And I'm sorry.
But then in 66, 68, that's 5 years, and maybe they were not as diligent about cleaning this almost 100-foot long by 50-foot wide expanse of floor every night. So that's why it would be so dusty.
There's something wrong with your story.
Okay, good.
Yeah, there's something wrong with the story because the rumor, I didn't work there until probably 70, 69. The rumor was that those floors were like that because they were not allowed to be touched.
Still in 70. Wow.
I never remember that changing, frankly.
Wow.
And why were those cables done? It's not because they're lazy or they, believe me, they had all kinds of assistance and all kinds of money for taking care of things. That's why I wonder if they were really refinished. I wonder if that...
For sure they were refinished at some point because there are pictures of shiny floors and you can see people's reflection in the floor.
But you don't know when?
In the mid-60s. And I think
then that was before I ever used it.
You got there. So it's possible that they redid that and said, we hate the sound of this, don't do anything to it anymore. I mean, I'm trying to imagine what the scenario could have been for both of our stories to be correct.
Yeah. And who would know?
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you, people like Jim Davis, Jim Davis was the guy, the maintenance guy who was assigned to 30th Street.
I didn't know him. I don't know about him.
Oh. Yeah, Jim was the maintenance man at 30th Street.
For what period?
While I was there. I mean, maybe not towards the end. I don't remember that. You know, the group of people who did all the studios, Lou Janone, Harold,
Who are you?
Oh my God, Harold Tarowski. Really? He was really the head. I mean, next to Eric Porterfield was well, probably. Well, you heard Art Cohen.
Yes.
He was like vice president below Eric, but Harold is the guy who really had a handle on all of that. And Harold would work with Lou Janone. He'd work with Jim Davis, but I felt that Harold was the guy. And I used to brag, frankly, and I still do, that. I mean, I know people in the other studios. They'd be wiring consoles for a weekend, and as the session was beginning the next Monday morning, they'd be under the console finishing their wiring, You never saw that at CBS. They were so on top of everything. I don't think I ever lost a session. In fact, I know I didn't.
Equipment maintenance problems.
Yeah, because of equipment. Once the Neve went down on me, and it was 6 o'clock at night, and I ran upstairs and got Eric Porterfield and said, "Eric, I've lost the console." And Eric said, with his pipe, let me take a look at it. And Eric nonchalantly walks down, starts playing with things, and turned to me and said, think you're going to have to call the session. Wait. And he walks over and pulls one preamplifier out, and it was shorting the console. And everything went back on. It was like, Eric, how did you know it was preamp number 23? I just kind of had a hunch.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I was very impressed and very, very fortunate. I mean, you hear these panels and they talk about the things that can go wrong, the things that do go wrong. Even one of the women today said, plan on things going wrong because they will go wrong.
Not at CBS.
Not at CBS.
Wow. But there's two parts to that. There's two components to that. One is the outside vendor consoles like the Neve, which you say were there. But then there were the CBS built ones, which I understand were built unbelievably well and super reliable and super quiet and super clean.
Yeah.
And
that's what we started
How
on.
would they guarantee that the Neves were not going to?
Well, you know what? Eric would come to us and say, "Hey, we're doing this. What would you like? What would you like to see in the console?" And, we'd give him feedback, and it just got to the point where somebody else has thought of this. It was MCI.
Okay.
MCIs were the first ones.
Now, you mentioned that when the Neve went out, you went to Eric Porterfield. Was that in the same building?
He was up on the 6th floor, 49
so
East
Neve would have
52nd.
been on East 52nd, not in 30th Street.
No, the Neve was Studio B, 52nd Street.
Yeah.
Did we have one in E also? I don't remember a Neve being in 30th Street. I don't even remember one being in Studio E.
Okay.
I think it was just Studio B.
I think I have a listing somewhere of some consoles that were in particular studios.
Good.
Where
I
they
wish I
used
had taken that kind of information. Damn,
It's
I bet
funny.
Stan Tonkel did.
It's funny how you just assume things are the way they are and that's how they'll be.
Yeah.
And you go along every day and it's that way and
Yeah.
then it's different and you go, what was there?
I know.
And,
But
I
yesterday,
think everybody is like that.
I saw, Steve and Tom. Why do I keep forgetting Tom's name? A significant
I
man
had
in
been
our industry. But just hearing those guys,
I bet.
and afterwards, we talked a little bit about
good.
what a period that was.
Yeah.
I mean, we had Goddard Lieberson,
Yeah.
a champion of culture.
Yes.
He made sure that class was coming out of that organization no matter what it meant. Bruce Lundvall, when he left, I kind of got him in a corner and said, Bruce, are you really turning us over to accountants and lawyers? Oh, no, nothing like that, but it really was. That's exactly, it changed. It changed.
Totally changed.
Yeah. Goddard Lieberson and those producers I mentioned, Shepard and Kasdan and Epstein. Paul Meyer was producer. They were significant. They were just, that was a great era. I was doing a different kind of music, but I really appreciated it. Generally, I was doing different kind of music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But backing up, you talked about the maintenance guys in the studio. Would they be the janitor types or the equipment maintenance type?
No equipment.
Equipment maintenance.
No, janitors, that was a whole other thing.
Whole other world.
But we had setup people who helped
Yes.
us in the studios.
Yes.
And they would help us run the cables and
Yes.
usually set up the booms and set up the
Yes.
baffles.
And as I understand it, it wasn't that they would help you. It was that that was their job, and if you touched it, you would be yelled at.
Oh, no.
Is that
Not at all.
Oh, good. Okay.
Not at all. In fact,
I've heard that.
I'll tell you an embarrassing story. I worked with Wild Cherry. It's really not my fault, but nevertheless, I worked with Wild Cherry, and I set up a baffle, and I didn't know that one of the guitar players had put his guitar leaning against the baffle. And the session was over, and I was moving things, and they were playing Madison Square Garden that night, and the guitar got destroyed when I moved the baffle. So, we did. We moved things.
Okay.
Yeah, we moved things.
Interesting. Because I've heard that it was rigidly unionized, and there were...
It was unionizing the point that nobody could touch the consoles. They didn't allow that.
Okay.
And we would get into trouble if we allowed people to touch the consoles.
Okay.
And
so the console was the borderline area.
we once got to... I recorded Mahavishnu, I believe it was.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Man, that is awesome.
Yeah, but I recorded that at the Felt Forum at
Yeah.
Madison Square Garden.
Okay.
And
recorded? It was a live recording.
Live recording.
Oh.
And their guys came up to us and said, you're not allowed to touch any of the equipment. We said, why is that? Because we're the union.
Right.
And we said, well, we're the union too, and you're not allowed to touch the equipment. So here we are, right? We made a compromise. We would place the microphones in the stands, and they would run the cables.
Wow.
But can you imagine?
I've heard things about the unions at Madison Square Garden, and I'm amazed that you were able to compromise with them.
When we did remotes,
Pretty intense.
not Buddy Graham, Hank Altman was the... Really? Oh, Hank was...
I'm ignorant.
Yeah, well, no, let's get some names out.
Please.
You know Jim Davis now?
Yeah, I do.
Maintenance guy. Hank Altman was the supervisor for remotes. He could be a tough guy, but he did all the remotes. And when we went to play, I remember recording in Buffalo, Carnegie Hall, he would have to talk to the people. You'd really have to negotiate some things. And Felt Forum, I think it was Hank who actually made those arrangements that we could do that.
Okay.
Sometimes he was never the second engineer, but sometimes he was the maintenance guy who would be assigned. So we'd go with the engineer,
Yeah.
the tape. Well, we probably called it. I mean, they were engineers. We all got the same salary,
Yeah.
but they were like tape ops.
Tape ops.
Yeah.
Bob Waller was one.
Bob Waller was the guy.
Long time.
Also 30th Street.
Right.
Almost exclusively.
Many pictures of him
Yeah.
at 30th Street.
Yeah.
And so there were studio assistants to help you wire stuff up and move mic stands around.
Right.
And then there were also studio attendants who would move furniture and artist stuff around and help load in and stuff like that. There's an Indian-looking guy who's in a lot of pictures, and I think he's often shown just kind of sitting there on a table or something. And these were probably before your time, maybe. But
I don't think there was anything. I don't think there was. There were, as far as I know, there were just the three levels: studio, tape room, because there was a separate room, and the setup guys.
Assistants. Okay, maybe this guy is a setup guy.
And Albert, I can't think of Albert's name right now, was from Belize. Once a year he'd go to Belize and he'd bring back roasted cashews, I believe it was.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Wow.
And then Bob Coleman and Eddie Hassel and you got to know, because it's part of the history, but you have to know about Willie.
No.
Okay, Willie was the vault man.
Okay.
Willie ran the vault, and Willie was a little dude who would, he talked the part, And I got to CBS Records. I was doing editing, borrowing editol blocks. So finally, I had gone to the supervisors, and we're waiting for it to come in, right? So somebody said to me, maybe it was Freddie Catero, he said to me, why don't you talk to Willie? Who's Willie? Willie's the vault guy.
And he was at 52nd?
52nd.
Okay.
And, we had extensive vaults there with, those things were all,
The stuff is coming and going all the time.
Yes, to Iron Mountain, where they stored it.
Ah.
So when we needed something, the vaults were very full, as they were. I mean, we had, I don't know how many thousands of tapes down there, all air-conditioned, all protected. But I went to Willie, I said, Willie, I've been waiting 3 weeks now, and I still don't have my own editing kit. What you need, baby? I said, well, I don't have a block, how I know most of the guys get a box, and they have the blades and the box, and shit, man, you don't have one of those? No. In 5 minutes, Willie walks in with the kit.
Man.
It's like he was the resource guy.
He used to have connections.
Yeah. So that was another thing. We had, he was like the librarian,
Yeah.
And
Wow.
once I worked with...
So there was a standard box that every editor got.
Oh, yeah.
And
with all the equipment.
say again what was in it.
It was like an editing block for quarter inch, editing block for half inch. That's all you needed. And when I first got there, I don't think we had. We were doing tape editing on 8 tracks immediately. I'm sure it came very shortly.
Right.
But Willie was the man.
Yes.
He's part of the history of CBS Records. Maybe not directly tied to 30th Street, but he's got to be known.
Factory.
And we had an HVAC guy who was, down at 30th Street. That thing rumbled so badly that if you were doing any serious recording, you had to turn off the HVAC.
How would you do that?
You would just turn it off.
Go to the thermostat, or was there a switch somewhere?
I believe we had a switch that just turned the whole thing, shut the whole thing down.
Where was the switch?
I had no idea. Are you kidding me? By the thermostat.
Maybe I'm lucky.
You know what? I wouldn't doubt that.
There's pictures of a thermostat.
Yeah, remember, I'm in the control room.
Yeah,
I wouldn't doubt, well, first of all, a guy like Jim Davis would know. And people...
Is he still around,
I don't know. People who are a little bit more observant probably do. And we had an entire 5th floor of editors who didn't really do studio work, but mainly mixing and editing.
Right.
And then we had another floor of maintenance people. And they would also do like cassette copying and things like that. Mastering, a floor of mastering engineers. So there were a lot of layers when you look at it that way.
Yes. A lot of people.
Well, we had at one point close to 100 engineers.
Wow.
And
just engineers.
Doing what we called engineers, including, what we would call tape ops assistants.
Yeah. And I learned that the tape op was not a stepping stone to some other, to being a mix engineer.
Not at all.
It was its own total thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's interesting to me. I didn't realize there was not a progression through jobs.
It wasn't that way in the other studios. Now, in the other studios, almost any studio in New York, and this was this hurt in a sense, but think about it. I had a graduate degree, and I had almost a bachelor's in engineering. I mean, do I really have to start by scrubbing floors?
Right.
CBS was one of the few places that I could get a job as an editor, as an active engineer. Any place else, they were taking kids out of high school, or, they were messengers, they were whatever, in order to get in.
The system.
Yeah. And then they did. If they were sharp, they observed, they asked questions, they worked their way into positions.
Yeah.
And Phil Ramone was an interesting guy.
He sounds like it.
He always, I'm not sure why, but Phil used to praise the guys at CBS, always.
Huh.
I mean, I come to AES meetings. Phil would always get up in panels and stuff and say, "This guy saved my tail." I did this session. He would talk about maybe Simon and Garfunkel, where they sent the remote, and I remember once he even said, "Is Don Puluse in the audience?"
All right.
It's like, Phil, come on. You were like the bright star of the industry when I was beginning. He didn't learn anything from me, but anyway, that was the appreciation he had for CBS, because I thought the guys were pretty serious and pretty thorough. Think of the people he started in this industry, including Bob Ludwig and Elliot Shiner, and I could, think of quite a few more. But Phil's really, he was the guy.
Yeah.
He was the guy. When I got into the industry, that's who they talked about. Roy Halley, I felt, was very good, very You know, he did great work. I mean, he did a lot of wonderful recordings. Don't think Roy respected many people, but Phil Ramone, I never heard him say anything bad about.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And Ted Brosnan?
Ted was a second engineer. He was what we called a second engineer. As we say, we're all the same.
Right.
But Ted would be, that was funny. At one time, I mean, it was sort of a basis for a gripe, but not really.
Did everybody really get paid the same?
We all got paid the same.
Interesting.
And,
Regardless
and,
of tenure?
and here's the thing, you know, the setup, the assistant engineer would come in and set up the machines while we were setting up. But if we were doing a mix or something, you know, we're done now, and he has to wind the tapes. So he would make more money than we did on the session, because he'd be on overtime winding the tapes back, and in real time, you know.
Right.
And the only thing is that they were not real strict on our shifts. So, you know, if I was booked 9 to 5, if that was my shift, 9 to 5, and I did a session that started at 4, 5 o'clock I got overtime. So, you know, they were very good about that. They didn't say, well, you have to be in here at 9 o'clock the next morning. If I had a session and went to midnight, I didn't come in until midnight the next day. Unless I had sessions, and then you come in whenever the session was.
Right.
Nobody expects you to come in and make tape copies
Right.
5 hours before the session.
Right.
You also heard probably about the fact that when the artist was able to work in different studios, they were required to work in our studios at one point. Then,
CBS artists.
then they made a deal that they could work in outside studios.
Okay, I don't know anything about this.
Oh, well, you know, again, it's not 30th Street really, but for the history, it's probably important to know that at that point, they started sending engineers to other studios because it was a union thing. We had to have a representative. So sometimes, you know, you'd have somebody who would go and help a little bit, but generally the guy sat in the hallway. It was very demeaning, very demeaning. And I hated when that came in. And one day I didn't have a session, and Roy came up to me and said, Don, you're going over to the record plant tomorrow. I said, to do what, Roy? He said, well, you know, just to be our representative. I said, Roy, do you really want a group to come into record plant with me sitting in the hallway and the next day I'm going to mix their album? Yeah, he said, that's probably not a good idea. So he canned having, you know, the mixers go.
Roy Halley canned it, or
No, Roy Friedman.
Okay.
Yeah, Roy was the manager.
You would go to the other studio but not mix and just sit there because it was a union deal.
They had to have a union rep from our studio.
Wow.
So then they started.
The other studio's guy would be the one who's actually mixing.
Oh yeah, sometimes, from what I understand, we didn't even go into the room.
Huh.
And again, that's, you know, that's demeaning. That's terrible.
Right.
But, you know, they started sending guys who weren't involved in the sessions. You know, sometimes a mastering engineer, but more production type engineers rather than people who were involved with live artists, live recording.
Okay.
And that's just part of our history you got to know about.
Yeah. When did that change?
That kind of changed when I got there, because what happened is they would do the session like a Frank Lako would do a session on 4-track, and then they'd send it up. The guy who did a lot of that was Stan Weiss, who did it for years.
Yes.
I did a little bit because when I first got there, they weren't, you know. But as the rock groups start coming in, and they said, okay, you know, you're going to record with Roy Halley, but you're going to mix upstairs with. They say, what? No, man, we're not going to do that. You know, we want to mix in the room that we recorded. We know the system. We know what things sounds like. We know this engineer knows where things are. I'm not going to teach a new guy where all of the and that changed when the groups got powerful enough, and the music got complicated enough, the recording got complicated enough, that all went by the wayside. So that's kind of when I got into the business.
Yeah.
Although I did mix quite a few things that Roy recorded. That was more, not that they couldn't get Roy, it was more, not the big groups, not Simon and Garfunkel that he spent a year and a half
powerful
recording,
groups.
you know.
Yeah, right.
Right, so I would mix some of that stuff, as others did. I mean, we had a lot of mixers, you know, on the fourth floor, as you know.
And
Not
that
a
would
lot,
be
but we had a
52nd,
significant number.
The mixing?
49 East 52nd
Yeah.
was everything,
Yeah.
except for 30th Street. You know, you know, when I think about it, I know so much about 30th Street, and I remember so much about 30th Street, but not really,
Yeah.
you know. And you know a lot of the people. You know Ray Moore.
Yeah. Yeah, I found some
Art
pictures.
Kennedy was one. Art Kennedy was
I know that one.
significant mixer on the fourth floor.
Okay.
Yeah, he's still around. He lives in New York.
Kendy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I mean, as I say, Stan Tonkel was.
Yeah.
He's the guy who kept the records, and he was the guy who it would be valuable to get that information.
It might have been Jim Reeves who was in touch with Stan Tonkel.
Is that right?
I think so. Yeah, and I've invited Jim Reeves to stuff, but he's in Illinois. And
Yeah, but Jim would be very positive to do this kind of thing. He's probably responded quite often. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he's very thorough also in documenting things like that in a different way. You know, a different way.
Yes. Well, I should show you some pictures.
Yes, please,
This would be a nice time,
please.
so let me pause these things here.